Welcome. One thing I love about meditation in groups, one of the things I love about meditating on a retreat, and even here in this online format, is the sense of what I like to think of as being alone together. I'm in my own inner world, you're in your own inner world, and yet we're holding this space of presence. And on a retreat, and every time, and I've been on a lot of retreats over the years, in the absence of talking, even making eye contact, in the absence of any banter, there's this deep sense of intimacy that emerges from just sharing presence with other people. And it can bring up this very profound paradox, the sense of, like, even though we're not sharing stories about our lives, there's just this intimacy of this shared inner focus. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what I think of as like belonging and not belonging. And I got this great question. It's a good while back. Do you think that there's an inside belonging that you tap into for your belonging to the outside world? I read that. Is there an inside belonging we tap into that helps us belong to the outside world? I just thought, whoa. Just a little riff on this. My sense is there is this reality of belonging. When we're truly awake, when there's this sense of there's nothing outside of me, there's nothing outside of presence. But there's this paradox, because sometimes when you have that sense of unification with all, you can feel more alone because the rest of the world is so committed to the concept of other on their way somewhere. And I know that for many people who are attracted to meditation, attracted to exploring, different states of consciousness, it's very, very, it sets you up to feel like you're very different. Because when you're really drawn to the inner work of meditation, it requires a sense of aloneness to be able to sustain attention on the here and now. And I think that's why, all these stories, these ancient practitioners, who would meditate in graveyards, they'd cover themselves in ash and meditate, where all the funeral pyres were happening, because they wanted to be left alone so they could feel their connectedness to all. And there's this paradox because we all want to belong, but we all want to stand out at the same time. And it's this nature of belonging and not belonging that's such a driver in our lives. And so many people now feel isolated more than ever. COVID did a real number on us as a culture. And many, many people, the natural introverts, have thought this is what I was made for. But others feel more and more a sense of feeling cut off. And what I'd like to talk about with the little time I have with you is what I'm thinking of as like in 4 parts, like the first mistake, the second mistake, the third mistake, and then connecting. A little bit of this is tied into the yogic philosophy on the what I call the kleshas, like how we create separation. So the first mistake we make is believing that we're different, believing that we're separate from source. There's a story I was struck by, and it's not a great story, so forewarning if you're feeling particularly sensitive. It's a story of this guy who he had a ritual with his young son. When he would come home from work, his son would get up on the top of the sofa and then leap into his arms. And this was part of their daily ritual. And one day the father was really angry and upset about something in his life. And his son, when he came back from work, crawled up on the back of the sofa and jumped to be caught in his father's arms, and the father refused to catch him. And his son fell to the ground and crying. And his father said angrily, "You've got to learn that no one is going to be there for you. No one's going to be there for you. Don't trust anyone." That's a horrible story. But on some level, I think we all get that. On some level, there's some very deep inner sense that we really can't trust anyone. If we do, we're going to be let down and we're going to be disappointed. If you imagine yourself as a happy baby in the womb, and let's just say you're a baby who's wanted, you're loved, everything you need is just automatically given to you. You know, it's the classic excellent womb service, if you will. And in this world where everything is provided for you, perfect temperature control, everything, one day you're popped out into this harsh light, overwhelming sounds, chaos, and you start screaming. And as this little being on your own now, sometimes when you scream, you're comforted. You know, when you're hungry, you scream, oh, you're fed. But not perfectly and not all the time. There's sometimes when you scream out of pain or fear or discomfort, you're not perfectly comforted. Your needs are not perfectly met. And this is the beginning of this thought. Something's off here. I'm broken off from the whole. And this seed is the seed of separation. And then our journey begins, or at least one phase of the journey begins. I'm on my own. You're this little vulnerable being, and there are these gigantic people who make this strange sound when they look at you, and eventually you figure out that that strange sound is your name. It's yours, it's unique, and then you discover like your toes and your fingers, and then you start figuring out as your brain develops, you've got your own particular strategy for getting attention, affection, and food. And you begin to realize, if I do these things, these huge people smile and they applaud. And if I do these things, there's some pain associated with it. And then you realize, I've got this audience, and you start developing your shtick, all to get what you want. And over time, you begin to forget where you came from, and you start to identify with this little body. You start to identify with your emotions. You start to identify with the stuff that feels good and the fear of the things that make you not feel so good. And on some level, we're looking for that sense of belonging, that unbroken connection to presence. The second mistake we make is then we dedicate our lives to this separate self. We start investing time and attention into the sense of a separate identity. I grew up on a farm in the Pennsylvania Dutch country. You know, and wherever you are, you get used to it. So I was very used to the horses and buggies on the road. I went to kindergarten with a good number of Amish and Mennonites. And most of them, well, I think all of them really, would just fulfill the number of years they had to attend public school legally. And then they would kind of withdraw into their communities. And where I was, kind of the northern part of the Pennsylvania Dutch country, we had sort of the very traditional, sort of like the Orthodox Amish, who were very strict in terms of their rules and regulations. And then the Reformed, which are the Mennonites, which had some variations of some of the rules that they lived by. For example, you know, the Amish would have like no electricity. But I remember Anna Brubacher in my kindergarten class. Well, they had electricity, but they could only turn it on Sunday when they had company. So others could have cars, but the bumpers would have to be painted black and so forth. But nonetheless, they were very pretty withdrawn. They had business, they interacted with the world, but the essence of it was they had really kind of separated themselves from the traditional culture. And so this very strict, in the Amish community, this kind of very strict sect, if you will, developed something out of generations and generations of raising kids and kids going through their natural growth process. And this tradition is called rumspringa. And rumspringa is translated as hopping around or jumping around. Around age 14 to 16, when the hormones are going nuts, there's a very formal process you go through where you get a year to get your yayas out. This is usually when a youth decides either I'm going to get baptized into the church or I'm going to leave. And there's something very cool about the kind of the ritual of this practice of acknowledging this is a time when everyone needs to blow off some steam, find out who they are. Acknowledging most of your reality is hormone-based. So let's just go for that ride. But because they gave permission for people to kind of explore, over 90% of the Amish actually choose to stay in their community. But I love this acknowledgement of how we all need to break free from our boundaries. And it's also interesting how kind of in that permissive culture of take off, do your thing, you decide, the vast majority of people choose to come back and to kind of belong. And it's really interesting when you think about that age of 14 to 16, how old were you when you started to rebel? How old were you when you started to want to step away? And it's a really interesting thing. I was really aware of how at age 14 to 16, I had hair down to my waist, being my own rebel. And then suddenly I realized everyone else had long hair. So I cut it because I had to dial in my specialness, This is a great New Yorker cartoon of this kind of a punker with his mohawk and his leather jacket and his nose rings and his chains, looking in the mirror. And there are all these thought bubbles of is my mohawk too high? Should I cut it down a little bit? Do I have too many chains on? Should my nose ring, would it look better on the left side or the right side? We're all wanting to fit in, but we're all wanting to stand out. And this wanting to belong is such a driving force. And when you think about who we were in our, let's say, just a kind of a primitive form in these naked, vulnerable bodies, the only thing that allowed our species to survive was cooperation. So when you were shunned, you could not live alone. So it's a primal fear about being alone. But paradoxically, in examining what it means to be alone, to be outside of a tribe, is actually an important part of waking up. Here's this crazy thing. I don't know how crazy it is, but it's a little out there. This was supposedly from my teacher's teacher in the ashram. He said how, and again, for this model, you have to kind of accept the idea of reincarnation. But he would say, or he said allegedly, that when a conscious soul comes into a body, the greatest fear is the fear of staying asleep, of not staying awake to that sense of presence, the true nature. And he, and It's been said by some teachers that the fear of death is nothing compared to the fear of life. When I think about that, I don't know about incarnation, but imagine you're coming into a body, there's some consciousness, and you're thinking, oh God, 7th grade, dental work, ugh. But what my teacher's teacher said, allegedly, was when a conscious soul comes into form, that quite often that soul will choose a family where they feel like they don't fit in. And the reason why they choose that is to stay awake and not to fall into tribal slumber. It's an interesting model. And I've noticed that a lot of people, and I've been around a lot of people who are kind of on a path, many of them have that sense of there was something where they felt like they didn't fit in. They didn't feel like they were part of the tribe. And that sort of drives that sense of like, well, first, like, well, where is my tribe? And even beyond that, well, what am I? What is this sense of discomfort? What is this sense of unease? What is this sense of stress and suffering that I'm carrying? And when you turn to examine that, it points back towards source. When I can't sleep, one of my strategies is to listen to a podcast. And the podcast I really like to listen to, I've mentioned this before, is called In Our Time. It's by the BBC. And they have basically a moderator with usually 4 professors. And there's one on history, there's one on philosophy. So in my insomnia, I've learned a lot. Some of it conscious, some of it not so conscious. But listening to history is fascinating. It's just fascinating how we have this constant perception of threat and the other. When you think about it, you've got your own little tribe. And the tribe over the hill is the enemy. And you're sworn to protect your tribe against that marauding tribe. But if someone in that tribe over the hill manages to come up with something you need, and you start to trade things, you're not so much the enemy. And if your sister in your tribe somehow has a child with someone from the tribe over the hill, your circle has just begun to expand. And so much of our history is this play of alliances and betrayals, of ruthlessly punishing people perceived as different. And this incredible manipulation of our perceptions of life in order to create this sense of others that can be perceived as the enemy. When my father was drafted into World War II, one of the big problems they had in World War II was convincing these young men to pull the trigger. And the Army realized they needed a training program to desensitize soldiers. And so they came up with a very effective way of entraining soldiers into view the other as the enemy, to perceive them as evil, to perceive them as less than human. And they also chose to reinforce those who overcame their reluctance to kill as heroes. And so in World War II, it was single shot. And there were machine guns, but the majority of people had like single shot guns or semi-automatic. And now when you perceive a threat, part of the instructions, you just lay down fire. So this whole sense of creating division is such a part of our history. The dominant culture imposes its values on the less dominant. And therein lies this incredible turmoil. And we see the turmoil that we're in right now. the polarity, the inability to listen. So much fundamentalism, which is this basic primitive perception of, if you disagree with me, you are my enemy. So this chronic sense of this separate self is being condemned to living in stress, because you are surrounded by threats. And you are in this constant narrative all day long of holding it together, doing the right thing. In order to belong, there are rules. To avoid pain and keep pursuing pleasure. And this mechanism of avoiding pain and pursuing pleasure becomes a treadmill for this sense of separation. A never-ending treadmill. The good news is there's a way through this. And the way through it is by noticing this feedback loop. And you have this beautiful, tailored feedback loop that's specifically and uniquely designed for you to let you know where to pay attention. It's called suffering. And when you can take the time to turn toward your discomfort, to turn toward that sense of separation, it can open up some new doorways. So you believe you're separate. You invest your energy into who you are as this separate self. And as you go through life, what you do is you accumulate more and more evidence that proves that you are this separate being. And there's a fear behind that. And I'll talk about this sense of investment, but also want to touch in a little bit around that fear. So on a meditation retreat, there was someone who asked for a private interview, and I knew this fellow to be incredibly ambitious, really pretty successful guy, but also not a happy guy. And as he sat down, he said, I've just come to see, I don't know why, but I keep sabotaging myself over and over and over again. So things are going well, I'm making improvements. I've got some new strategy on how to manage my projects, and I can feel things moving, and I start feeling really, really good, and I start feeling like I'm on top of the world, and then something happens. Something blows up. And then I get paralyzed. And then I give up. And then I have to start all over again. What is this? I can't break out of this cycle of getting it together and then blowing it. So we talked about about the circle and the line through the circle, which I talk about a lot. Imagine a big circle. There's a line through it. Above the line is what you're aware of. Below the line is what you're not aware of. It's the unseen, the unfelt forces that tend to kind of run the show. So we explore it through some inquiry, kind of like recognizing the pattern and kind of making room to look at it and moving into investigation. We did the essential practice of RAIN, to recognize, to allow, to investigate, and then to explore what it means to nourish what you find. So as we explored, really investigated that mechanism, and again, as you well may know, the primary place to explore is somatic, really what it feels like inside. And he kind of contacted this tension. It was in his heart, it was in his sternum, it had some roots down in his guts, and it was this very, very, very deep tension. And when I asked him to kind of describe it, he sort of described its location and his feeling tone. It was like this knot, but like a flame and so forth. And And I asked him what it was all about. And he said, I want to be successful more than anything. I want to be successful. Now, what's interesting, when we do this somatic investigation, you feel something that's below the line. It's just coming into awareness. And then so you name it, and you're naming it to kind of bring it above the line. So one of the things you can do is to ask yourself, does those words match the feeling? So I said, let's look for a little resonance here. Does wanting to be successful actually match the feeling inside? He checked back in. He sat there for a long time. And then he opened his eyes and he said, this isn't wanting to be successful. This is terrified of being successful. If I'm successful, then I'm being seen. Then I'm being promoted. I'm being more open to criticism. I'm being exposed for who I am. And I hate being exposed. I don't want that. And as we went on to sort of bring some kindness to that, it brought up all these feelings of self-judgment and being judged by others, and calling on loving presence helped him to get in touch with that. It wasn't all healed and tied up with a bow, but he saw that something in him was wanting to be successful, but also something in there was terrified of being successful. And he got in touch with kind of the primary elements that shape our character. And that is what you want and what you don't want. The aversions and the attractions in your life that sometimes are intensely set against each other. Something in you wants it, something isn't so sure, and depending on which one is the microphone, that's where your attention goes. So when you think about, if I were to ask you right now, what are 3 things that you most like in your life? Just 3 things. And just spontaneously, off the top of your head, what are 3 things you most dislike in your life? 3 things you most dislike. This is a byproduct of investing your life force into the sense of a separate self. You believe you're separate. You invest all of your attention, all of your time into who you are as a separate being. And then your list of what you like and what you don't like gets longer and longer the more you live, the longer you live. And this is an integral part of freedom. If you don't take a hard look at your likes and your dislikes, you're going to be living inside these riverbanks. And you may have noticed as people get older, those riverbanks get more and more narrow. One of my favorite cartoons from the New Yorker is this couple, and they're in their they look to be like in their hundreds. And they're having their meal in these dried up little bodies. And the caption says, I forget, which one of us hates green beans? If we don't pause to look and really examine what you like and what you don't like, you will be confined to those riverbanks. As Tsin Ming, the third Zen patriarch, said, to set up what you like against what you don't like is a disease of the mind. So we learn through challenges, through testing ourselves. One of the things I'm trying to do is bring more strength training into my practice. Because when you're pushing and straining, it sends signals to your brain that you have to stay strong. It's not time to die yet. And in that same way, and here's the good news, is if you have a mindfulness practice, you're going to start seeing your likes and your dislikes. When you start to slow down and pay attention and take this seat of the observer, this sense of non-preferential awareness, you start to see the play of your likes and your dislikes. And you get to really examine them closer. You get to see just how much you are driven by preferences. One interesting place to pay attention is called this sort of one level called Vedana, paying attention to the feeling tone. And the feeling tone is your reaction to pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Just to notice. I mean, if you like, you can just close your eyes just for a moment. We'll do like a 45-second Zen pop quiz. You can just close your eyes. Just think about something that gives you pleasure right now. Maybe a food that you really enjoy. And just notice what that feels like inside as you just stream attention toward that. Now bring into mind a food that you really don't like and just stream attention to that and notice, is there a different feeling tone that starts to form inside as you think about this? And now think about something that you're just sort of indifferent to. Is there a feeling tone here? If you like, you can open your eyes. Each of us in our own way is driven by these preferences in life. Pushing, away, grasping, or just boredom. And when you can take the time to examine your relationship with good and bad, it can set up huge insights. And it can really help you see how all the ways that you cut yourself off. When you notice how you try to control and you bring wisdom and compassion to that, it can allow you to connect to the here and now. And it can point toward what it means to feel connected to life. And it has the potential of pointing toward the nature of reality itself. It's this capacity to turn toward the unpleasant. The sense of what's between you and belonging. And if we don't do that, it points toward this final point I'd like to make in these final minutes. And it's this. There is an inherent sense of connection, true nature. As you come into this body, you begin to think something's wrong. Oh my gosh, I'm separate, I'm cut off. When you believe that, it sets you on this journey of identifying with who you are as a separate self, identifying with this body, identifying with these thoughts, identifying with your stories. And the more you invest into your life, the more your list of likes and dislikes gets longer and longer and longer. And the more you don't examine those likes and dislikes, you're driven more and more by this essential fear. That essential fear is the fear of death. What if, after a lifetime of investing most of your attention into preserving the sense of the separate self, it all goes away? This is from Goethe. And until you know of this, how to grow through death, you are just another troubled guest on the gloomy earth. Goethe nailed it there. Until you know of this, how to grow through death, you're just another troubled guest on the gloomy earth. And this points toward really kind of the ultimate awakening. I talk a lot about my time on the river. Now it's fall, I can get out there way before sunrise. So I'm out there in the darkness, and then I get to watch the light come up. And I have this little thing I do. I paddle upstream and I float downstream, and I kind of do an open-eyed meditation. And a lot of times it just sort of comes up spontaneously, where I just ask myself, what if my body wasn't here, but my awareness was here? And sometimes I get this sort of magical sense of how it's all happening without me. You know, this bird flies over here. This sound arises over here. A flock of geese fly downriver overhead. And there's this exquisite sense of just feeling a connection to everything. This glimpse into how this world is so vast. And when I can lower my identification as a separate being, paradoxically, there's this sense of connection. There's a story of a wise teacher surrounded by all his disciples, and he's on his deathbed, and people are crying. And he looks up and he says, "Why are you all so sad? Where could I possibly go?" And this points toward a real sense of what it means to belong. I haven't talked a lot here about belonging to a family, belonging to a community, etc., etc. And while there's so much richness in that, our essential belonging is belonging to awareness itself, to presence itself. And it's why so many traditions talk about who you are through the doorway of what you are not. You are not preferential awareness. You are not grasping mind. You are not aversive mind. So an interesting little reflection, and again, we have just a little bit of time here. If you like, you can close your eyes. And with your eyes closed, imagine who you are in the absence of hearing. Imagine who you are in the absence of smell or taste. Imagine who you are without sight. Imagine who you are without feeling. Imagine who you are in the absence of comparing. Imagine who you are in the absence of judging. And take just a few moments to sense this quality of presence that lies beyond the senses, that lies beyond the comparing mind. If you like, you can gently deepen the breath, and if you like, you can open your eyes. You can remain with them closed. Some traditions say that the first mistake we make when we come into these bodies is this sense of forgetting our connection to Source. In that forgetting, we then focus our attention on who we are as this separate being, to our bodies, to our conditioning, to the mind, to our beliefs. The more we invest our time and attention into reinforcing this sense of separation, the more we become enmeshed in this world. And the more we enliven this essential fear, this essential knowing of impermanence, that this which we have invested into is going to vanish one day. So mindfulness or meditation has been described as dying while alive. When discomfort arises, to turn toward that discomfort. To remember that who you are is awareness itself. That you are indeed this body, you are indeed your emotions, your thoughts, and yet you are something beyond that. Remembering that not belonging is part of the dream of this journey. So I'd like to close with a short reading by John O'Donohue. If you like, you can close your eyes. This is called For Belonging. May you listen to your longing to be free. May the frames of your belonging be generous enough for your dreams. May you arise each day with a voice of blessing whispering in your heart. May you find a harmony between your soul and your life. May you know the eternal longing that lives at the heart of time. May there be kindness in your gaze when you look within. May you never place walls between the light and yourself. May you allow the wild beauty of the invisible world to gather you, mind you, and embrace you in belonging. If you like, you can deepen your breath, and if you like, you can open your eyes. Thank you for your time and for your attention. This is another one of those death talks, which truly can be a doorway to freedom. And in the midst of not belonging and the pain of not belonging, turning toward that pain of not belonging truly is a doorway into seeing clearly into the nature of reality itself and finding your place in the mystery. I love the line from Adida when he was asked, "What should I remember knowing how confusing this life can be?" And his response was, "Learn to love the mystery." And I find for myself, when I explore what that means to love the mystery, it somehow connects me with something larger than myself. So even though you and I are alone, we are alone together. Thank you again for your time and for your attention, and blessings in your practice and blessings in your life.